Good afternoon, or good morning, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world, and welcome to today's episode of Global Crisis, Global Solidarity, hosted by the Rosa-Luxemburg-Stiftung and its Center for International Dialogue, and we are streaming live from Berlin. Every first and third Wednesday of the month, Global Crisis, Global Solidarity welcomes thinkers, activists, and partners of the Foundation to develop a better understanding of the local, regional, and global aspects of the current crisis, as well as take a serious look at what kinds of strategies an internationalist left can offer in response. My name is Fidal Zanin, and I'll be hosting today's episode. If you would like to take part of the conversation today, just drop us a line in the YouTube chat box or on Facebook, and we will do our best to take as many questions as we can. The Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa, AGRA, was founded in 2006 to give new impetus to the fight against hunger on the continent through corporate-driven green revolution. It promised to double the agriculture yields and incomes of 30 million small-scale food producers' households by 2020, thus halving both hunger and poverty in the focus countries. To achieve these goals, AGRA received over $1 billion, mainly from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, but also from UK, from the US, from even Germany. And the results have been really disappointing, to say the least. Yields increases for key staple crops in the years before AGRA were just as low as during AGRA. And instead of halving hunger, the situation in the 13 focus countries has worsened since AGRA was launched. The number of people going hungry has increased by 30%. Today, we are joined by Anne Maina, National Coordinator of the Biodiversity and Biosafety Association of Kenya, as well as Urhahn, Program Director of the Food Sovereignty Rosa-Luxemburg-Stiftung, to learn more about the issue and more about AGRA's track record and the dubious rule of the corporate agriculture around Africa. So just to start right away, my question to you, Jan, considered as the favorite among many Western donors, including Germany, of course, the Green Revolution in Africa, AGRA, what is it and what is it about? And what are their supposed aims in Africa? Could you just tell us more about AGRA?
First of all, thank you so much for having me this afternoon. I'm glad that I was invited to participate in this very important dialogue, and I'm very much glad too that Anne is joining us. So whenever I don't know further, I'm sure that Anne will step in and will rescue me. Concerning your question, what is AGRA? As you have put it already in your introduction, AGRA is the Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa. It was founded in the year 2006, so basically 14 years ago, by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, by the Rockefeller Foundation, with, from my perspective, the sole objective to transform the food and agriculture systems in 13 main countries where the initiative is mainly operating on the African continent. What are the objectives? AGRA has promised to not just double the yields, but also to double the incomes of 30 million small-scale food producers, and also having the number of people going hungry and living in poverty in 20 African countries by the year 2020, which is now. How does AGRA try to achieve its objectives and work? AGRA follows an input-intensive model of farming and is following the model of the Green Revolution. Although there's actually a lot of evidence from many Latin American countries and from Asian countries, from India in particular, that this whole approach, that this whole model is actually not working and actually damaging humans and also the environment. What does it mean? What is an input-intensive agriculture? This means that that farming is supposed to use mainly GMOs or hybrid seeds, artificial fertilizers, and also pesticides. And the whole program is just designed to enable Africa to make its own green revolution in order to reduce hunger and poverty. In order to do so, I would say AGRA works on two different levels. One is through financial support, funding. It is supporting projects on the ground, but it mainly is working on establishing networks of agro dealers. So these agro dealers are the ones, they would supply the small scale farmers with inputs such as hybrid seeds in most of the cases and fertilizers. On the other hand, AGRA does a lot of lobbying and advocacy work towards mainly African governments for structural changes that will set the political course for a green revolution in Africa, mainly in the areas of seed, like trying to get rid of farmer seed and replacing farmer seeds by corporate seeds, and also on fertilizers. So AGRA is basically promoting measures which can serve as a kind of a door opener for the international agribusiness, and they are the ones mainly benefiting from AGRA. Who is supporting AGRA? And then I come to an end. It is mainly governments in the global north, such as US, UK, but you also mentioned Germany, for instance. It is also some governments in the global south, and it's these big foundations such as the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and they have provided so far out of that approximately $1 billion budget, approximately 500 million US dollars, so half of it. That would be from my side so far for trying to give a brief introduction into AGRA.
Yeah, thanks. Now it's clear like who is benefiting from the programs and the policies AGRA is implementing in Africa. So the Rosa-Luxemburg-Stiftung just released a new report called False Promises. I'd like to ask what motivated the release of the report and why at this point? Jan.
Question. The report was not just released by Rosa-Luxemburg, it was actually a joint effort by, I think, 10 different organizations, some from Germany, but also many from African countries. Anne from Kenya is joining us today, so Kenya was part of this exercise, but also organizations from Zambia, Tanzania, and from Mali. And maybe let me begin with a more general remark, and I promise I will also get back to your question. For the past 5 years, the numbers of people going hungry worldwide are on the rise. And at the same time, there is since many years an ongoing debate among so-called experts, but also the interested public on how to solve this problem and how to provide sufficient but also nutritious food for every human being living on this planet. So on the one side of that whole spectrum, there is the simple thesis mainly by the agribusiness, by the international agribusiness, and also with some support from governments. And they argue we just have to increase the yields through the application of hybrid seeds, through the application of more fertilizers and more pesticides in order to get more production. And so their narrative is very simple because they are saying the more food we produce, the less hunger. It's very simple, maybe also convincing, I don't know, but is it really true? On the other side of the spectrum, however, there are a huge number of movements and civil society organizations worldwide, and they do argue that hunger is not a problem of production. There is sufficient food available worldwide. It's rather a question of how to use it, access and distribution. So the core roots or the core causes for hunger and poverty in the world are rather rooted in unequally distributed power resources, but also the control over means of production. And when we're talking about agriculture, then the means of production are, for instance, seed or land. This whole narrative, and now I'm trying to answer your question, continues to be very influential across the globe, but in African countries in particular. So the governments, and many governments on the African continent, are lobbied to change the frameworks in order to support international agribusiness with, so to say, new laws and projects. And one of the most prominent initiatives which is trying to push African governments for these political framework changes is the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa. Interestingly, this initiative has started 14 years ago with these huge objectives. It has created a lot of attention, a lot of political support, but at the same time, there is neither from AGRA itself or from its main donor, the Melinda Gates Foundation, any evaluation whether they have achieved their objectives or not. So these were reasons enough for us to see whether AGRA is actually performing and achieving its objectives or not.
This takes me to my next question, which is apparently, I would like to ask how, or they are under criticism, but what are the main findings of the report besides apparently that they are taking farmers' right to choose whatever seed they want to use in farming? So what are the main findings of the report, Jan?
I'd like to start with a few numbers, because what we basically did, we tried to see, these are the numbers they put as objectives, and this is the reality we can find in the different countries. So I want to recall again the objectives. The objectives were to reach 13 million small-scale food producers and doubling their incomes and their yields, and at the same time halving poverty and hunger in 20 other African countries. By the way, which is quite interesting, the number of 13 million small-scale food producers is more or less the overall number of farmers, be it the big ones and commercial ones, or be it the smaller ones, who actually exist in these 13 main priority countries of AGRA. Since the start of AGRA in 2006 until 2018, the yield performance was really bad. Instead of increasing the yields by 100%, they managed to increase it by 18%, sorry. Interestingly, the period before AGRA, the increase in yields was more or less the same. So this raises, from my perspective, serious doubts as to whether AGRA is a factor in any growth in productivity. And then again, the hunger figures. The number of people going hungry in these 13 AGRA priority countries has increased by 30 million in the course of AGRA, which is an increase by 30% in only 14 years. So they have achieved, or they have mobilized a lot of support from African governments and donor countries. However, they were not at all able to reach their own objectives.
Yeah, and okay, thanks a lot, Jan. My question to you, Anne, since Jan has mentioned that the biodiversity and biosafety in Kenya contributed to the report, I'm wondering, did the AGRA, the organization, respond to any of these findings, or do they even share data about what they are doing or to what extent they have achieved their goals?
And we are very happy to be able to be part of these findings and the publication. Maybe to add a little bit about from what Jan has spoken is that the push for the introduction of a green revolution in Africa was pushed by a lot of major organizations led by the Bill and Melinda Gates organization and Rockefeller, with a lot of funding that came in. He spoke of about $1 million US. Even after using of $500,000 US to the so-called support African nations and smallholder farmers to push for a green revolution in Africa, it has been quite disappointing because the figures of the number of people who are going hungry, the number of farmers who have fallen back into the debt trap and into poverty has increased over the years. When we did the research together with the other partners, the Rosa-Luxemburg Foundation, IPAD in Mali, TOAM in Tanzania, Tabio, and together with others, and the lead researcher from Tufts University, we wrote to AGRA and they did not provide any information. When the report was released, they released a statement which was sort of denying that they have not had much impact with smallholder farmers. We went ahead as organizations in which were involved in publishing the report in Africa. BIBA, which is Biodiversity and Biosafety Association of Kenya in Kenya, PELAM in Zambia, who contributed to the Zambia, and HOMEC, which is an organization in Nigeria, and wrote directly to AGRA. On the 7th of September this year, 2020, they responded on the 15th, categorically denying and talking about that it has been a slow process, but they're getting there. What is interesting is that the amount of policy influencing that AGRA has done with the national government is very sad that our African governments are now putting funds to support AGRA processes through fertilizer subsidy program in the various African countries, through promotion and importation of pesticides, most of them being toxic, and hybrid seeds. For us as organizations in Africa, in Kenya in particular, my organization has 60 member organizations, which are networks. We have been calling for a more concerted approach into supporting farmers, because when you put money into importing hybrid seeds, it has an impact on diversity, food diversity and seed diversity. By working through the agro dealers, for example, in Kenya, you see that farmers are being pushed to a process where they, for example, instead of increasing the diversity in their farms for nutritional security, they have begun concentrating and creating new lands where they're growing maize, which is a staple in Africa, but we need diversity. For us as institutions working in Africa and in particular even in Kenya, our approach is into promoting crop diversity, food diversity. The number, for example, of lifestyle diseases have increased in Africa over the years. The reason being that there's a change even in terms of feeding habits. And for us, we push for the broad promotion of different crop varieties, from the millets to the sorghums, to reduce the cases we're having now of lifestyle diseases like hypertension, diabetes, and that's a big challenge. And so we have been calling on even the governments, for example, the German government, the UK government, and other governments that are supporting agriculture processes in Africa to support smallholder farmers. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. So apparently it's been 14 years and they only came up with a statement after the false promises report was published, and they only denied and still haven't shared any results or data. But my question is, I want you to elaborate more on how AGRA is working inside Kenya, if you could please, and what kind of activities do they do, and how does that affect biodiversity on the ground?
Research that we did together with the Rosa-Luxemburg Foundation, we found out that AGRA has invested over a total of about 7.3 million US dollars in agro-dealer development. Agro-dealers are at the local level, at the shops where they sell fertilizer, pesticides, and hybrid seeds. So a lot of money was put into agro-dealer development to approximately 25,000 agro-dealers in the whole of Kenya, and they were trained and certified to operate as private input suppliers. And when we have done further work and research, what is interesting, for example, in Kenya, most of the agro dealers are not well regulated. So if I have capital and I live in a place where I can do an agro dealer shop, I just need the capital and go forward, open the agro dealer and get the suppliers. And like, for example, in medical pharmacy, medical medicine, where there's the pharmacy and pest and poisons control board, which regulates them. That's a weakness that we have seen in Kenya, because even without the training, if I have the capital, I can do that. And so you found there was a focus on the promotion of hybrid seeds. What the biggest challenge with these hybrid seeds is that over the years, we've seen a lot of climate change impacts happening in Africa. And so you could see cases where farmers were provided for with hybrids and fertilizers, and they went and planted, and the rains failed. And this became a challenge because some of them had been forced to go into loan to get the seeds, to get the fertilizers, and to start to grow. Unlike in the previous past, when farmers had their own local seeds, they could choose their local seeds and plant different varieties, and they would have a chance to reap or harvest even if the rains were little or the weather change. And that was a big issue that we raised in the Kenyan market. Then there's the full liberalization of the fertilizer market in Kenya. So many dealers brought in a lot of fertilizers. We found in some areas where, for example, they have been using fertilizers for like 20, 30 years, and farmers lack extension service to even test their soils. So you find farmers are growing seed every season and using more fertilizers, not knowing the right kind. And for us as an organization in Kenya, we have been pushing for a reversal of this and use of integrated pest management, use of crop rotation, use of various ways where we can improve our soil instead of the continuous use. Because when you continue using fertilizer every season, you deplete the nutrient quality, you continue using a lot, and eventually the soils die off. And that is a big challenge in Kenya. And so we found those challenges in the Kenyan context.
And you have already mentioned that you are calling for other ways of supporting farmers in Kenya or even in the continent. And I'm pretty sure that from day one, many farmers in new AGRA will be counterproductive. And I have read somewhere that 1 year right after launching AGRA, another meeting was initiated and was called Agroecological Alternative to AGRA that took place just to challenge AGRA. Today, do we have any grassroots initiatives trying to challenge AGRA on the ground? And if yes, could you just tell us more about that?
In Kenya, we have many of the organizations have realized, or farmer groups have realized, the challenges related to using all these fertilizers. First of all, the expenditure is very high. If you're buying seed every season, hybrids, buying fertilizers and buying some of the pesticides, some of which are toxic, the cost is really big on the smallholder farmers. And many of the smallholder farmers in Africa, in Kenya, don't get government subsidies to support them in agriculture. And so a lot of the costs. And then what you find very challenging, for example, in Kenya, you'll find a farmer has planted their crop and they want to use the sales from this crop, for example, maize, to pay school fees, take care of their family. By the time harvest season is coming, everyone is harvesting. The price of the commodity, for example, maize, goes down. And so the farmer has to sell cheap to be able to quickly take their children to school. This becomes a big challenge because in the next few months, they are now struggling with the issue of food insecurity. Working through our organization, Biodiversity and Biosafety Association of Kenya, and our membership, we have over 60 member organizations working with farmers at the grassroots level. We have been pushing for an integrated approach where we are promoting agroecology, which is a broader term that looks at sustainable ways of production. And this has gained a lot of traction because with devolution in Kenya, where we have sort of federal or county governments, apart from the national governments, we have 47 county governments. We have been pushing even for the introduction of policies on how to practice agroecology. One of the counties where we are based, which is Kiambu County, is almost at the tail end or the process of finishing their policy on agroecology. We are also working in Meru County, in West Pokot County, supporting the communities to push for this. And what is interesting is that it's coming from the farmers who have felt the impact of this intensive use of chemicals, which is also having a big challenge, even in terms of health for the farmers and the community. Because I talked about the toxic pesticides, they're having an effect on the kind of health complications people are having. And so there's that move towards agroecology, which we clearly support and are supporting even at the county level through the policymakers.
Yeah, you have mentioned agroecology. What do you mean exactly by agroecology? Just because you have mentioned it, is it like a new model of farming or?
New model of farming. It was what farming was, for example, when we started farming, when our lands were very fertile. Agroecology is practicing agriculture that is not input sensitive. The agroecology, we move from just producing for now, and we are looking at the future. The 10 principles of agroecology look at sustainability, affordability, accessibility, because as Jan earlier alluded to, the issue of food security is not an issue of that there's not enough food in the world. The issue is about accessibility, affordability. Can you be able to afford? Because when you have, for example, a population that is increasingly becoming urbanized, they have to depend on buying food. Where is this food coming from? In agroecology, we promote the use of sustainable means. For example, instead of using some of the toxic pesticides, I've been talking about integrated pest management. How do you manage pests in your farm and diseases to avoid the increased use of inputs? Even organic agriculture is one of the practices that falls under agroecology. And so you find that in Africa, it was usually what happened before. But with a change in mentality and a change of attitude, because when you find farmers quickly running to the agrovets to buy hybrid seed, it's because there are all these campaigns and pushes that farmer seed is not good. Farmers don't know how to breed their seed. Farmers don't know how to save their seed. Yes, yet these smallholder farmers have fed people like in Kenya for hundreds of years, and their seed was of good quality. And so it is a change in mindset, not to always think that agriculture has to be input sensitive and the intensive use of all these chemicals that are having an impact even on the ecosystem. Looking at issues of agroforestry, how do you manage our forests and natural resources for greater biodiversity and these ecosystem services? In brief, that is how we define it.
Yeah, thanks a lot. That was very profound answer, and thanks a lot. I would like to go back to Jan. Jan, you have already mentioned that one of AGRA's aims was to double the agriculture yields and incomes as well of 30 million small-scale food producers households by 2020. And guess it's like we are just 1 month, or they are behind the deadline. They have already reached the deadline. So today, what impact does it have on farmers on the ground? And just tell me what you think of that.
When I was answering the last question, I was very much talking only about figures and numbers, but all these figures and numbers, they also translate to impacts on the ground. And from my perspective, the situation of many, many small-scale food producers has, through AGRA and its interventions, even worsened. And I will maybe provide 3 different aspects. One is there is a high risk of indebtedness for small-scale food producers. And I think Anne was already talking a little bit about this. In AGRA projects, it's usually the agro dealers. They sell the inputs to small-scale food producers, so hybrid seeds and fertilizers. This is extremely expensive for small-scale food producers. And examples from Tanzania, but also from Zambia in our study show that the farmers themselves have not been able to repay or to settle their debt after the harvest, because they're usually obliged to pay back the credit immediately after the harvest. And as Anne has pointed out, is the prices on the market for their harvests are very low. So there's actually no way how they can actually service or settle these credits. Secondly, restricted freedom of choice. The freedom of choice for small-scale food producers to decide for themselves what they want to grow, when they want to grow it, etc., is restricted in many AGRA projects. Again, examples from Tanzania, small-scale food producers participating in AGRA projects were not allowed to practice mixed cultivation. Each crop must be grown on a separate field. This, on the one hand, increases the costs of production for the small-scale food producers, but on the other hand, it also decreases biodiversity, which is really important for every functioning, sustainable agricultural system. And also in an AGRA project in Kenya, and maybe Anne, you can also add on this, small-scale food producers are not given the choice of which maize seed to use and which fertilizers and pesticides to apply. So the whole approach of AGRA is really restricting the freedom of choice for farmers. And thirdly and lastly, there is a decline in nutritious and climate resilient crops. AGRA only focuses on a certain number of crops, for instance, maize or soya. Traditional nutritious foods are neglected or even displaced. And statistics for the 13 AGRA main countries show the following picture. The millet production fell by 24% in the AGRA period. Overall, roots and tubers, which include nutritious traditional crops such as sweet potatoes, experienced a 7% decline in yields, and groundnuts, which is also a stable crop in many African countries, and very important for instance, as a source of protein, saw an alarming drop by 23%. So these three aspects I was talking about, risk of indebtedness, freedom of choice, and decline in nutritious and climate resilient crops, show very clearly how dangerous actually AGRA is for small-scale food producers.
And we are also talking about food sovereignty when we think about those three aspects. So it's apparently everyone knows how dangerous it is, but they are not stopping anyway, despite doing nothing in the last 14 years. What is really interesting to me is that everyone is talking about how Mali is doing relatively good or better than other countries, as they did not give in totally to the AGRA model. But I'm also thinking about how is it failing the farmers in the other countries who totally give into the AGRA model. But this is not like a dead-end road. So I'm wondering, what kind of alternatives do we have? Is there any political framework that could change the scene, or how can small-scale food producers be supported? So my question to you, Anne, what kind of political framework do we need to change the situation?
Out of the call.
Ah, okay, I see. Then feel free, Jan, if you have any, if you have an input to see how can we, in that regard, do we have any political alternatives? I'm pretty sure that the report already stated some good alternatives on what to be done.
There are always alternatives. The question is just, how can you implement the alternatives? And this is very much about who has the power to decide. Anne was already talking very much about agroecology as a concept, and agroecology is quite interesting because when we are talking about input-intensive agriculture, this is a system or this is a model which comes from the West and like from European countries or from the US. And people, or we from Europe or the US, we think that this is the only model how a successful and modern forms of agriculture look like. Interestingly, the concept of agroecology is a concept which comes from the global south, and it has different dimensions. I think Anne was very much talking about the practices associated with agroecology, but agroecology is also a social movement, and it is also a science. So usually it's researchers, for instance, they would breed in a laboratory new seed and then try to sell them through companies, or companies would develop them in labs and then would try to sell them. But the approach in an agroecological model is that farmers and researchers would come together and would decide together what are the needs, what are maybe the local requirements, and would try to further develop or breed seeds in a close cooperation between farmers and researchers.
Because of course they know better, like the local farmers definitely know better than like some Western imposed farming model like imported to Africa. Yeah.
Yes, for sure. And I assume when we're talking about food and agriculture, there is no one size fits all answer because as you were just saying, the local conditions, they differ everywhere. You can't just develop one sort of seed in a lab in Germany and think that it will work in every corner of this world.
Yeah, so still, like till today, AGRA represents itself as an African organization, and I think it's really clearly that it is not the case. But the question is, like, if they are missing their goals, and at this point we know what is it really about and who is benefiting, or we know at this point who is benefiting from that, like some Western agricultural companies and all. But how can, from your point of view, I would like, of course, to hear from Anne, but from your point of view, how can Africa move beyond the Green Revolution, and what can Europe do to support achieving that?
So that Anne is back, I'm very glad. I think there are always different levels and dimension we need to address. And maybe let me start with a political dimension. And since I'm working with an organization which is based in Germany, I think we also need to maybe address the German government first, because they're also supporting AGRA. So I think as a result of our study, we can very clearly see that AGRA is failing, and that the German government should withdraw its not just financial but also its political engagement in AGRA, but not just AGRA, because there are also plenty of others initiatives which are also trying to implement the Green Revolution. So they should withdraw from all of them and shift all this political but also financial support into agroecology. And maybe what is our role from my perspective as a Rosa-Luxemburg-Stiftung? I think in our case, we should try to do two things in particular. One is, as we had done with this report, trying to create knowledge, trying to create information, always in a close cooperation with our friends, allies, and partners, and also support and through these information support them in their own advocacy efforts. And secondly, for an organization as Rosa-Luxemburg, I think it's crucial to support organizations on the ground, the movements in their struggles to so to say, to get rid of the Green Revolution and and to let the alternatives flourish.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jan. So, and since you are back, I'm glad you are back. I'm not sure you have heard my question, but I repeat it, like, since the AGRA are missing their aims, they are apparently very counterproductive. Like, what could be done, and how can Africa, from your perspective, move beyond the Green Revolution, and what can Europe do? Tell us what you think about that.
The electricity went out, but we have turned on the generator. I think it is important that African organizations, African governments focus on supporting smallholder farmers even in small ways. As we know, in Africa, about 70%, we are fed by almost 70% of smallholder farmers. What smallholder farmers are, very minimal support to move them from one level to another. For example, with the challenges of climate change, creating and supporting small dams or water pans to ensure that the water is available throughout the year will make a big change in terms of production for the smallholder farmers. And that's, I think, a priority that the government needs to take. There is no need to put in money for large-scale farms, yet you have smallholder farmers who can benefit from small irrigation. For a long time, governments in Africa have ignored the aspect of extension services. In the 60s, in the 50s, in the 70s, extension agriculture officers were very key in terms of supporting farmers working in agricultural practices. And the impact that it had is that when the government, under the structure adjustment programs, most of the governments stopped training and hiring extension officers. The impact was production went down. And so it's important that government puts in place, brings back this aspect, because what has happened, institutions like AGRA have replaced these extension officers, and now farmers just need to go to an agro dealer. An agro dealer is interested in selling their product. So when they say, I want to increase production, they are sold for more pesticides. And the agro dealer is interested in selling their seed, of course, with a push from multinationals. And so they'll tell the farmers, your seeds are not good, your seeds are not right, so grow these seeds. And yet, we know farmers have had that skill. So the support from extension officers, irrigation, small irrigation facilities will be very important in increasing productivity for African governments. We are very happy at the international level, the Food and Agriculture Organization has embraced agroecology as one of the strategies that can be used to increase food production, food safety, food resilience in the face of climate change, and this is very important. So those are the small things that we would like to do. Organizations on the ground are already doing this, but if government puts in that money, if GIZ, which works with farmers, with groups in Africa, would support agroecology and these small systems, there would be a big difference in terms of productivity.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Anne. I can see already that our audience are really happy to hear that agroecology is coming more into the mainstream media. I guess this is all the time we have today. I'd like to remind the audience that False Promises, the Alliance for the Green Revolution in Africa, that was recently published in German and also in English, can be downloaded on the website of the Rosa-Luxemburg-Stiftung at www.rosalux.de/en/agra. My name is Fida Al-Zanin. Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Anne. And thanks to everyone who joined us today. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter at the Rosa-Lux_global. And also feel free to leave us any suggestions for the future topics or guests here on Facebook or on Twitter account under the hashtag Global Solidarity. Thanks a lot and see you next time.